I think we'll gently get started. I say gently because there's a few introductory slides. So folks who join us a little late will still be able to catch up pretty quickly. But again, welcome to all of you who've joined us this afternoon for our next session of our Teaching and Learning in a Pandemic sort of occasional series that we started last spring. This one focused on making remote learning come alive. Next slide. So some of our usual housekeeping details. I think at this point, most of you are very familiar with online meeting, but just in case, these were a few pointers that we like to show each meeting. The one I draw your attention to today is that we are inviting folks to join the chat and participate at a few points throughout the meeting. The other one I'd like to remind us all is that if you could please make sure you're muted when it's not open conversation. It does look like you all have done a great job of that. So thank you. Next slide. For those who haven't been at one of our webinars or events before, we do offer closed captioning through Otter, which we think is a little more reliable than the one usually on Zoom. And you can access those if you could benefit from closed captioning by clicking that button on the top left-hand corner of your Zoom screen. Thank you. Next slide. So today's goals are in this sort of roundtable format to discuss our own successes and problems of practice related to remote and hybrid instruction and student support, to learn from our peers about some of the emerging successful practices, and finally to consider some promising new approaches or potential approaches to meeting our students' needs in the months ahead. Next slide. So in the calendar invitation, this had a rough agenda, and we will have a chance for some breakout conversations later today, which will be a great opportunity for each of you to participate. Prior to that, we'll get a chance very soon to hear from Dr. Julie Riley from Manchester, Essex, who can share some of their district's practices. So it will be a great chance to hear about one district's approach to this, which I hope will spark some of the great conversations that will come later in breakouts. Next slide. So right now, as you're joining us, I know there are some faces and names that I have not seen before at one of these workshops for ECLC. So I invite you to share in the chat your name, your school district, and something that you think you're better at now than you were last year at this time. Something that has come out maybe as a new strength or an area you've really worked at since the pandemic began, perhaps. While you're doing that, one thing we didn't do was an introductory slide about what ECLC is. So I'll just share for those who are joining us for the first time that it stands for the Essex County Learning Community, and it is a group of districts from throughout Essex County. Right now we are up to 11 districts in Essex County that work together as a community to grapple with some of the things facing the world of education, both currently and even in other times, specifically with a focus on supporting students who have unique learning assets and challenges, and making sure that we set up our schools and districts to best meet those students' needs. ECLC is sort of facilitated by a partnership between the Center for Collaborative Education and Full Frame Communications, and generously funded by the Tower Foundation, as well as other partners who have supported us. And I'm seeing in the chat, several of you are introducing yourselves. Thank you. We have a lot of folks joining us today, in particular from Saugus and from Hamilton Wenham, which I think is fantastic. I also see representatives from at least 6 or 7 other districts throughout Essex County. So it's wonderful to see you all, and welcome to our ECLC event. Next slide. Something I'm going to ask you to do now, it helps us begin to think about grouping later for breakout sessions. If you could please put a number next to your name by renaming. And the little slide here shows 2 different options for renaming yourself. You could hover over your name in the participants menu, click the More button and click the Rename. Or you could hover over your own picture, if you can see your picture on the screen, right-click and click the option to rename. Please don't replace your name altogether. We want to know who you are. But if you could add a number to the end that represents your role, as you see on the screen, there's one for classroom teachers, or I say if you're a paraprofessional, please add yours there as well. If you're a special educator, specialist, coach, that would be number 2. 3 would be for guidance, social worker, other student services. Student teachers should probably be 1 because you're working directly in classrooms with students, unless you're a special education student teacher, in which case you'd be a 2. So I saw that in the chat. And for administrators at the school level, number 4, and administrators at the district level would be number 5. Thank you. Next slide. For those who haven't been part of a lot of ECLC events, I'll just share that our belief is always that the wisdom is in the room. It comes from you all, even a virtual room. This is true. And that's why you'll see throughout today, there are lots of opportunities for you to share. Even those of you who feel like you're struggling with distance learning or with the hybrid environment probably have learned some wonderful things that would be valuable to share with your peers. Sometimes those of you who have been doing really well with this situation don't have enough platforms to share what is going well with your peers. And so this, I hope today can be an opportunity for that. Next slide. We'll pause for just a second to review our ECLC community agreements. I invite you each to pick one that feels most salient today for you in this environment. Stepping up and stepping back, the second to last, may be relevant today as we ask that you all take an opportunity to share out when there's the right opportunity and to listen and be learners. Next slide, please. And finally, although we do have these community agreements to help us run smoothly and meet each other's needs, we also know that we are being extra flexible these days. If you have a child climbing on your lap or an animal moving around in the background, either of those is totally fine. You might hear my first grader from time to time for the same reason. And it's welcome, and we're glad that you're here, coming as you are. Thank you. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over today to colleague Emily, who will continue the conversation.
Thank you, Diana. Hi, everyone. I also want to extend and wish you a very warm welcome to all of the friendly, familiar faces I see out there and all of the new faces. We are so excited to have you joining us today to dig into this very important, timely topic. So thank you, Diana, for kicking us off. We are going to be talking today, as you know, about some promising practices that are being shared within the Essex County learning community. So we'll be definitely digging into more around ECLC and sort of crowdsourcing from all of you to hear your voices in terms of what's going on the ground where you are as well. And we have a few really juicy bits to dig into before we get to that. I do just want to acknowledge that we have a question in the chat about what number someone should put in when they are renaming themselves if they are a student teacher. So I do just
I did answer that a minute ago. It should be 1 or 2. Yeah.
Thank you, Diana. Great. So as we know, we're focusing today on reflections on a new reality, which is an ongoing new reality. We last tackled this in the spring when we came together for our first few discussions on teaching and learning in a pandemic. And so we'll be, as I said, moving right into some promising practices that have emerged since that time in the past few months, since many school districts have reopened and moved to different models of teaching and learning. Next slide, please. So before we get to what's happening within some of our ECLC districts, we first wanted to highlight for you a new report that just came out. It's hot off the presses within the past couple of weeks. And it was commissioned by the Essex County Community Foundation, ECCF, which is a very close partner of the ECLC. We wanted to highlight a few key findings from that report and also let you know that this report can be found in your participant folder that you have today, which has a bunch of other resources that we hope might be helpful to you as well. So I'm going to put the link to that participant folder right now in the chat, and we'll share it a couple more times as we get going today throughout the next hour or so. And if I could direct your attention to a couple of the findings that we have up here on the slide. So we wanted to first share that this report sort of reinforced what we know to be true about the digital learning divide within the county, across the county, which is that we know that this divide in terms of access to technology, in terms of access to broadband, is cross-cutting and is happening in every single community, in every single town and municipality across the county. We know that towns and municipalities that were already struggling with disparate economic barriers are faring worst of all now because of the COVID-19 crisis, and with students and families and educators, frankly, trying to access the technologies that they need in order to continue with their learning and teaching. And so this is a cross-cutting crisis. It's happening in every community. And yet we also know that communities with a disparate amount of families who are living with incomes at or below $35,000 a year are struggling the most. And so there are families living at that level of income in every community. And so again, we can see how there are both cross-cutting and disparate effects that are impacting families during this crisis. And then last, we wanted to highlight for you, again, another point about equity, which is that the study that was commissioned by ECCF and put out as part of this report found that Latinx residents across Essex County are at least 2 times as likely to need access to broadband when compared to their white non-Latinx neighbors. And so again, we see many of the disparate impacts of this crisis being deepened as a result of the ongoing inequities that we see, inequities in terms of access, inequities in terms of existing infrastructure, and families, especially those living in dense populated areas, being able to obtain what they need in order to be connected technologically. So we do encourage you to go check out this report. As I said, it was part of a study that was recently commissioned by ECCF. They partnered with a researcher at Tufts University in Boston to study and do a deep dive into the digital divide within Essex County. And ECLC was part of that work, and we think this is a really important piece that we will continue to pay attention to and share with you. Next slide, please. So next, we will be hearing from one of our peers. We are so thrilled that she could join us today and share her wisdom and knowledge and the emerging promising practices that are happening in her district. We are joined by Dr. Julie Riley, who is Director of Curriculum and Instructional Technology at Manchester Essex Regional School District. And she'll be talking with us today about, as I said, what's happening in Manchester Essex, specifically around their remote and hybrid model. And so we want to welcome Julie and again, thank her for her time and what she's about to share with us today. Welcome, Julie. Thank you. It's great to have you on, and please feel free to get started when you're ready.
Thank you so much. And thank you for offering this. I remember speaking with you this summer about all the challenges of learning all of this material to go fully remote, which we had decided upon at a time when it was obviously a challenging decision to make. But we spent the majority of our summer trying to learn about hybrid models, what they looked like, what fully remote models looked like in the transition to hybrid. And so I just remember saying, if I can just help one person with some of this, if it ever happens to them, I want to be able to offer it. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to just share some of the things that we went through in our planning. So I appreciate that. So I added 2 slides to this presentation just to give a sense of how we kind of got to where we are right now. Although I will say with this caveat that we're transitioning to hybrid. So remote was kind of a short-lived experience, but we feel comfortable that we could transition into that again if we had to, for whatever reason. But we ended up using 5 main sources of information to help us develop our hybrid HyFlex model. And so we called it a HyFlex because it was an online remote model combined with a potential for transition to hybrid. And that brought us to the HyFlex world, which we found a lot of colleges were already kind of evolving into. So we took learned from them, I should say, on our planning. We used 3 different texts. One is Hybrid Flexible Course Design, and there's a link to it there. In addition to that, we read Small Teaching Online by Flower Darby, and a great book that you can get on Amazon right now for, I think, $4.99, is Teaching Effectively with Zoom. And it's a professor from Harvard who had done his whole coursework online and just wanted to share his experience and how to engage students through Zoom. We also use the 2 links at the bottom, the Modern Classrooms Project, which is a really great resource. It's like the gift that keeps on giving, and has a ton of resources for teachers to just learn about all these different technologies that they can incorporate into their classwork. And then we also learned from the Blended Content Studio videos. So that link is there as well. So we had a lot of learning to do, and we spent the majority of our summer doing that in preparation. And so the next slide, I think, breaks down how we used our technology to support both hybrid and remote. And I'm just reading off my notes because the slide is small from my vantage point here. We tried to categorize our thinking in terms of what was needed. So we knew that we needed to create impactful lessons based on the work that we had done in the spring when we transitioned to a fully remote model just at the drop of a dime in March, as everybody had to. We didn't really have the tools necessary to to really offer deep, impactful instruction. And so that was a driving goal for us to learn about over the summer. And so we ended up building out our learning management systems and our instructional strategies through trainings, and really worked on how to deliver content instruction using Seesaw and Google Classroom, and really kind of honing down on the specifics within those 2 learning management systems in order to really create a fully robust system. And then we had to work on our communication skills and how were we going to communicate with students and families. And so we had to make a determination, will we be using Google Hangouts or Zoom rooms, or, there are now many other things that you could also incorporate, but we had to really get trained on that and try to figure out how to create district practice around our communication styles. And then we also wanted to do our work with building classroom community and collaboration and feedback for students. We felt like we wanted to do a better job with our collaboration, but also sharing information with students and families. So we really learned a number of different technologies. Sorry if you can hear the beeping in the background. I apologize. You know how it goes. So we learned a lot about Flipgrid, Padlet, Pear Deck, Screencastify, Submit, Edpuzzle, and Kami, and those ended up being our go-tos in terms of technology licenses. And so we trained all of our staff on those practices as well. So we started to build those practices into our everyday lesson delivery. And we're still doing that even within the hybrid model. And then our supports for all students, we're really looking at ways to bring students back who have not fully returned for a variety of reasons, whether it's just the grade level grouping or the school. And so we did a lot of work on SEL in the last few years. So we were working on and are working on supports for students, but we're also finding that we need to really talk about supports for staff, because it is such a big transition from remote to hybrid. And now as we're kind of getting deeper into this pandemic, there's just a lot going on for a lot of families. So we're trying to do our work on that front as well. And I think that's probably where we'll go next in terms of focusing our energy to support our students and our families and teachers, obviously, who are really kind of carrying the weight of it all. So there's a lot going on, but I just wanted to share some of those things in case people were looking at, trying to move into a remote model or position themselves should they have to do it. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. That was incredible. I think we learned so much in just a few slides and a few minutes from hearing you talk and share with us about what you all have been doing in Manchester, Essex, and how things have continued to evolve, I think is a big piece of the story too. I want to open it up next to folks and ask what questions you have for Julie. And I'll ask Callie to also bring us to the next slide. So based on what you just heard from Julie, what resonated or sounded familiar and what was new? Go ahead, Kristen, please. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Julie, I'm curious about the feedback for students, building community and collaboration slide where you identified 6 apps, add-ons that you're training your teachers in. Was that the focus just on that? Because I find what's happening is that there's so many amazing tools out there to use, and it gets really overwhelming. So was that a priority for the district, that you were just focused on those 6? And
yes, absolutely. In the spring, when we all went remote, if you will, every license in the world opened up with a free trial, if you remember that. And so we were doing everything, and our teachers were exhausted because they were learning so many different technologies. And then when you heavily invest your time and energy in a resource like that, that could go away because only some people are using it, or the license now is bumped up to $5,000 for the school year. It really becomes an issue. So we really focused on what we thought would work for us, and we bought the site licenses for the year so that we would have them no matter what. And so we shared that K-12 for all staff, and we picked the ones that we felt would be the most useful.
And so just to follow up, how did you vet those, and what kind of training opportunities did you provide for your district?
Well, we vetted them through, if the Modern Classrooms project is a really great project because it's a course, it's an online free course, and we all took it. And so it really highlighted for us the technologies and how to use them. And so as we're kind of moving forward with that, we learned about those technologies, and then we were trained this summer. We worked with a really great trainer who helped us kind of build the vision around it, I guess, if you will, and gave us deeper training on that. And then over the 10 days that we all had this summer, each school had a team of trainers who were kind of super users, I don't know what to call them, but people who felt really comfortable with delivering this support to teachers. And we used those 10 days through that kind of structure to train our staff. So each building had its own training team, if that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you very much for those questions, the original and follow-up questions, Kristen, and for sharing your responses, Julie. I am going to ask folks at this time to share other questions that you have in the chat log with us, because we do need to move along pretty soon, and in order to make sure that we get everyone into breakouts and that we have more chance to discuss both what Julie presented as well as your reactions and thoughts about what is happening in your own districts. So I do see a couple more questions. One from Deb, is Pear Deck similar to Classic? Does anyone know? Jane also asked, what, if anything, would you do differently looking back, as well as how did you select the texts? So I think what we will do is that we will make sure to get some answers to these questions and get them out to you in a follow-up from today, because I think that they're also going to continue to come up as we move along through the next half hour or so. So let's transition now, and please keep these amazing questions coming. Let's transition now to our next segment. Next slide, please. And I'm going to hand it back over to Diana, who's going to lead us into the breakout portion. Thank you again so much, Julie, for your presentation. And thanks to everyone. Please keep those questions coming.
Actually, it's Laura from here, and you can go to the next slide, Callie, since I think everybody's been renamed. So Laura?
Yes, thank you. So we are going to transition to the breakout space for today's learning. I just want to take a brief moment here to remind us of our community agreements. I would say in particular when we go into these breakout spaces and we have a chance to engage in a different way than being sort of an active listener in these early parts of the session. I just encourage you some of the to remember some of the community agreements around stepping up, stepping back, sharing sort of airtime in the space, etc. Thank you, Callie. Next, please. So in the breakout rooms, we're going to ask that sort of within your group, you work together to figure out who can help the process move along, as well as a volunteer or maybe a couple who would like to keep track of some of the high level thinking that happens in this space. We're definitely not looking for you to record absolutely everything, but for those of you who have been part of our Essex County Learning Community experiences in the past, you know how important it is to us to hear what you're thinking about so that we can use that to improve different offerings we have moving forward, as well as inform new areas. And some of the things you're experiencing now are a result of people asking for learning spaces like this. So that's particularly helpful for us.
Also, there's one of us in each of your breakouts, so we can take either of these roles if it makes it easier too.
Absolutely, yes. So the focus of the breakouts, the prompts we're going to ask you to think about in those spaces is really what's happening in your own space, wherever you're coming from. So what's working well? What challenges are you currently experiencing? And are there any resources that you're eager to share with colleagues? And I would say even too, if there are resources that you feel like you're desperate for that you haven't tracked down, that you sort of want to elevate, thematic resources you're looking for. We can move to the next one, please. We have provided, I'm going to have one of my colleagues share this link to the chat, please. We have provided a link where each of the breakout groups can find a Google Doc for recording their thoughts. We are also offering Jamboard for the first time in the Essex County Learning Community today. And I would love to see participants, if we could just do a hand up if you're familiar with Jamboard, if you've used that before. Great. Okay, it looks like a few people, not a ton. We are excited to potentially introduce you to a new tech tool that you can use both with students and adult learning. So feel free to explore that if you'd like to. And in just a moment, Diana is going to pass us forward, and you should be receiving an invitation to join a breakout space. And we'll stay in that room for about 15 minutes and be back together by 4:45. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. And I'm excited to see that you all made it there and made it back again. So thank you. As you're rejoining us, I invite you, if any of you feel deeply appreciative of something you heard from a colleague in the group, please feel free to share that in the chat. But we will take maybe 3 minutes, just kind of 1 minute a group. If there's somebody who can report out from each group, just any major takeaways. We will also keep a record of your conversations if you did it on either Jamboard or the Google document. But somebody from group 1 want to just briefly share out any big takeaways?
I can share. So I had the privilege of being with the teachers, and I think that one thing that came up that was sort of a kudos or a shout out, which I'll do again here. So we have with us Shelby, who is like learning to teach, new to the profession now. And so there was a little bit of praise from her more veteran colleagues just of what that experience must be like, and kind of a broad sweeping wondering about what it means for the profession and sort of who's going to be interested in teaching given what teaching looks like, and so just appreciation for sticking it through as a new teacher in these times. And then I think there was a lot of shared ongoing challenges really around the broad topic of student engagement. So how do you really engage kids in different formats, and also just understanding that student motivation might look different this year, whether you're teaching them remotely or hybrid or in person, because kids have a lot going on.
Thanks, Laura. Since that was one of the 2 groups of educators, I don't know if somebody from the other one, group 3, can share.
Brianne, I know you put something in the chat. Do you want to share your comment, or I'm happy to summarize too? Oh, you're on mute still. Oh, sorry, Brianne. Unmute yourself.
I said you
Thank
can
you.
share. I put it in the chat, so you're welcome to report out. I will say the
Okay.
one thing, Emily, I thought was really helpful as I shared my stress of what was going well, but not working with all of the work that I'm feeling I'm putting into things going well. And you told me that that was online learning. And so, to be honest, it was good for me to hear that I don't need to hate the pandemic more than I already do, because I'm just like, this pandemic's making my life awful. But it might just be like, this is an online learning thing. So that was helpful for me. But you can go ahead and share what Kristen kind of talked about too.
Sure. Thank you, Brianne. I think I'm happy to share out just some of the highlights from our talk. It was really helpful. We heard mostly from Luciana, who has some experience using Jamboard. So that was great to hear from her about all the different uses that she's figured out so far to use that tool for. And Brianne and Kristen shared more about what's happening at their district level and sort of the evolution over the past couple of months of what they've been learning in terms of their own professional development to transition to online. Folks shared, some of their frustrations and again, highs and lows around this, because it has been this ongoing painstaking process. And we just tried to validate that, this is both pandemic related, but it's also something that has been a critique of online learning for a long time, and one way that makes it so difficult. So I just want to thank everyone for being so open and sharing and being really courageous in this small space that we had to talk about what's happening. I also just want to preview, because we did get cut off, of course, that we're going to be talking about next steps. So please don't feel like you're cut off without a lifeline. We are here for you, and that's what this series is for. So please stay connected to us. And I'm looking especially at my group, and I'll be back chatting you as well to share some resources.
Yeah, we definitely have more to come. Does somebody from group 2 want to just quickly share out? And if nobody volunteers, I don't know, Jane, you could just briefly share a quick summary of what was discussed with the school and
Yes.
district leaders.
I was just waiting. I was doing your trick of the waiting time. Well, we were lucky. We had Julie in our group, so we were able to follow up with her and ask her some additional questions. And I saw a comment in the chat from Deb, who said that they're envious of the PD planning time that MERSD had, because she felt that they were just afloat. And I think we're impressed with the way they committed to the process. Also, something Julie said that was interesting is how, the little things took up a lot of time. I would imagine other people feel that way too, like that how Google Chrome connects to Zoom and how microphones have an impact. And Dot then said, it's like peeling an onion. We were very busy with one thing, and then the next layer kind of emerged. And so there was always something more. The next layer was ready to come up. And she talked a little bit about what they did with their 10 days of having first 3 or 4 days in building. Then they did the middle week was professional development. And then they had a couple of days in their classrooms, and they did their kickoff at the end of those 10 days, and they had Camila Drummond as their speaker for the school year. So I was happy to hear that. Shelley, you talked a lot about the one-day strike and the impact that that's had just on the school year in terms of the controversy in town and things making the papers, and that you have had 93 grievance hearings. So this is, and part of this is Shelley attributes to a union president who wrote a manifesto that appeared in the paper that was anti-technology. So that's, that's a tough thing, but that despite all of it, that people seem to be doing well. There haven't been complaints from parents. They've decided Schoology is their LMS, and they had 21 teachers doing PD. And I'd be interested to know if other people had instructional assistants for people learning at home, and that's what Andover did. Carolyn, you just got a little bit of time and said you were that the hybrid model is where you are, and you were asking a lot of good questions about about cameras and about engaging people, the kids who are at home.
Thank you, Jane, for sharing. And I'll just say we'll make sure we make all the resources available to you through our website and plenty of other means we'll talk about in a few minutes. So thank you. I know it's never enough time. I say breakout rooms are usually either too long or too short. There's no such thing as the perfect length of time. And the good thing about them feeling a little too short is I hope it makes you eager to come back and continue the conversation soon. So next slide, please. And we want to offer a resource. You did a little bit of resource sharing in those groups. We wanted to offer a resource that Jane had discovered. It's a book called The Distance Learning Playbook, which has a lot of really fantastic sort of a framework and a lot of really fantastic specific resources that could be really supportive for those of you who still feel like you have a bit of a learning curve and who would really enjoy having the chance to dig in a little further or feel like it could be helpful to you. So we are happy to share this document summary with you. So Jane actually was able to provide a very quick summary that she's made available for you all. So it is in the chat for today. And somebody in the chat just noted that there's also a version for administrators. So that's something we haven't checked out yet, but welcome you to give it a shot. One thing I will share, if you go to the next slide, Callie, is so we have these summary notes, and in your participant folder, there's also a link to these summary notes. A couple of ideas. I would normally pause to be a little bit more generative and interactive here, but a couple of ideas we thought of that could be useful would be using these this document that we made available to you as a way to sort of self-evaluate which of these practices are already in play, which of these are things that you as an educator may want to reconsider, you as a leader may want to look at more closely for your school or your district. Another potential tool is having a departmental meeting or a PLC meeting, starting with this document as a text-based discussion spark. And if folks are really excited, you could always move into the book as well. Regardless, we hope that it serves as a sort of a spark for your own new ideas. You've all inspired me. I know every time I talk to any of you, I'm hearing so many ways that you are being creative in the space that you are in whatever setting you're in these really inopportune circumstances. So hopefully this can help spark some new ones. So thank you. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Emily to unveil a little bit about what's coming next.
Thank you so much, Diana. And so this is a moment that people have been asking for because we do have hot off the presses as of today, our date for our next session within this series of Making Remote Learning Come Alive, Part 2. So we will be joined by Transcend, which is a nonprofit organization, an educational nonprofit organization that works to make sure that members of learning communities have the tools and technology that they need in order to advance their both in-person and remote pedagogy. And so they will be joining us, as I said, for the next session to go over and do a deep dive into the science of learning and development. They will also be walking us through their curated collection of remote learning resources. And it didn't make it up on the slide here. It looks like I tried to add it in the very last few minutes, but we are going to meet with them on Thursday, November 19th at 10 a.m. until 11:30 a.m. We know that this will probably pose a conflict for many of you who might be teaching at that time. This was the time that they could join us during the day. So we will also absolutely be recording that session, and we will have a transcript from it so that we can share that out with you afterwards, because we know that this will be a highly anticipated conversation with them. There will also, of course, be time for question and answers and for them to share their insights with you directly. So we will make sure that all of those resources go out, especially if you cannot join us at the exact time that this next session is being offered. Next slide, please, Callie. And then also what we have on tap for you, in addition to our next session of this Making Remote Learning Come Alive series as a continuation of teaching and learning in the pandemic, is our regular community convening, which happens on the third Tuesday of each month. So you can see it here. Our next convening will be held on November 17th. Which of course is a Tuesday, from 3 o'clock to 4:30. So we always meet for our ECLC community convenings the third Tuesday of each month from 3 to 4:30, where we come together and talk about a different topic or theme every time. This next time, when we'll be meeting in November, we will be talking about communications and including some resources for different types of communicating with different types of audiences, because we've definitely heard from all of you that more resources are needed for communicating within your colleague circles, within district, with families. So we'll be digging in a little bit more to that topic and sharing some resources with you. And then we also have coming up on tap here our very highly regarded, highly rated Universal Design for Learning professional development series that will be led by Dr. Gabby Schlickman, who is a wonderful expert in UDL. And she'll be joining us for the first time as we kick off this series for cohort 2 on November 10th. So this is for registrants only who are part of cohort 2. Cohort 1 completed this series. Some of you might remember that last year. And this will be continuing through mid-January. So we'll have several different meetings for this series, and the first one is on November 10th. If you haven't registered yet, please register. There have been several invitations going out from Diana, and we're really excited to share this learning with you. Gabby is a really dynamic, empathic, wonderful teacher and presenter, and I think I would say engagement specialist. So we're really excited for you to all go through this process, cohort 2 members of the UDL series, and please register when you have a chance if you haven't already. All right, great. So that sets us up for what's happening next in November and for the next part in this series. Next slide, please. Does anyone have any quick questions that we can answer? If you'd like to raise your hand, please go ahead on anything I just went over in terms of events, anything related to events, or please put it in the chat and we will make sure that we get back to you. Any quick questions that we can quickly answer for you? Okay, because we are a little tight on time, I'm going to take that small pause as no, but please, as you're thinking of questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and we will make sure that we get back to you. On our next slide, please, I'm going to ask everyone, I'm going to just bring your attention to this link that we have that Diana also just chatted for folks. Oh, she put 2 links in the chat. Thank you, Diana. The first one is the registration link that I was just shamelessly plugging for all of you cohort 2 members. If you haven't signed up for our UDL series, please go ahead and do that. The second link is a very short evaluation survey that we ask, we pretty please beg with you to fill it out from today. This gives us really invaluable feedback about how we did today and how we can enhance the next time that we meet. So it's really crucial that we get feedback from you. We won't have time to pause it and do it together today as we normally do. So I just invite you all to click on this link, the second link for the remote survey, and open it up in your browser so that you can hopefully take like 1 to 3 minutes at the end of today's session when we close and fill it out on your own. And that way we can get your feedback, which again is so valuable to us and will help shape future meetings. Okay, and I think I'm going to move us along past this remote survey and the debrief. Again, if folks have things they want to share or questions they want to ask, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I want to make sure that we get to our next few last bits of closing. And with that, I'm going to ask Jane to go ahead and introduce our last piece here. We will end on this, and it's a video that Jane wanted us all to see together and to share with you.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's just so much fun to see you all, and I had the sense that a lot of really good conversation was happening today. And so I just want to thank you all for being here, and thank you so much for what you're doing and for your creativity and your commitment. Just know that our team really appreciates what you're all doing every day, and we want to be supportive to you. I want to end today with a poem on video by somebody named Lederick Horn, a wonderful guy I've had the opportunity to work with a little bit. He's a poet, a writer, an activist, somebody who grew up with a learning disability, and just reminding us of the kids that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and really what's at stake for our country in educating kids who have unique assets and challenges. So I will leave you with this as a way to be inspired to go forth in the world and continue to do the wonderful work that you're doing. So we will not come back after this, but just want to say goodbye to you all and enjoy this last video. Thank you so much.
This is for the ones who would not be trapped behind exclusion's shameful wall. And this is for the ones who will continue to push until every barrier falls. This is for every wounded warrior who came home and challenged our grateful nation to elevate its expectations. This is for the ones who blocked the buses, sat in the sit-ins, and crawled to the Capitol. This is for the protesters, the marchers, those adapt angels with wheelchair wings who troubled the waters of their time so that this generation might live in a more inclusive now. As I write this, all over America, monuments are falling, and only questions stand atop each empty pedestal as I recite this. I hope an artist is listening and will respond with marble and bronze. But until then, Ed Roberts, Judy Heumann, this poem is for you. Let each line chase the light in your smiles and trace the contours of your commitment. Let these words salute those dedicated to the ideals that equality sprouts from the branch of equity. Independence is the flower that grows from access, and freedom is rooted in the soil of advocacy. This is for the ones who've embraced the reality that humanity is both fragile and mighty. When we ask for help, it is not a sign of weakness, but instead is an indication of our determination. However you navigate, it is legit. This is for those who read with their eyes, ears, and fingertips. This is for the minds that dance in details, and for the wide-eyed ones that remake the world with every thought they think. We are the river of innovation from which the whole world drinks. And who am I? I am a lover of words, left heartbroken by every spelling test. In school, my desk was in a classroom at the end of the hall, so this poem is for me too. Within me is the meeting of two movements. I am black and blue. My disability is hidden, and I am the descendant of those who could not hide. I am your neighbor, your countryman, one of the poets our nation has produced. And here is what I know to be true. This world is not enough. And if this here is what we call normal, I say, let's be different. Let us, on this day, celebrate every shape, every color, every way. Let our actions commemorate the array of our being. Build a future in service of the multitude, and let this century be the wilderness from which our better selves are born.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.